An Apple Watch doesn't swim. It doesn't paddle 9 hours through open ocean. It doesn't climb back aboard a 46-foot yacht on its own. So why was Lynette Hooker's watch, the one she was photographed wearing the very last day she was seen alive, found dry, sitting aboard the Soulmate? By the end of this video, you will understand why investigators have stopped calling this a disappearance and started calling it something else entirely. Before this story goes wrong, and it does go wrong, you need to know who Lynette Hooker actually was. Not a headline, not a statistic, a person. She was 55 years old from Onstead, Michigan, and she was not some inexperienced tourist who wandered onto a boat for a weekend getaway. Lynette was a seasoned mariner. Years before she disappeared, she made a decision that most people spend their whole lives only dreaming about. She sold her Michigan home, packed up the life she knew, and moved onto a sailboat full-time. The open water wasn't a vacation for Lynette. It was her life, her choice, her freedom. Picture what that actually looks like. The hull creaking at night when the water shifts underneath you. The salt smell that gets into absolutely everything. Your clothes, your skin, your food, the pages of whatever book you're reading. The feeling of waking up in the morning with no walls around you except ocean in every direction. There is something extraordinary about that life, something that most of us will never know. But there is also an intimacy to it that people don't talk about. When you live on a 46-foot sailboat, you are never more than a few feet from the one other person aboard. There is no separate room to disappear into, no drive to clear your head, no space between you and the person sharing that boat, just water and wind and each other. That boat was called the Soulmate, a name that is going to sit differently by the time this video is over. Lynette's daughter, Carly Aylesworth, described her mother as an experienced mariner, someone who it seemed deeply unlikely would simply fall overboard. She knew these waters. She knew that boat. She knew exactly what she was doing out there on the Sea of Abaco. That detail matters. It matters a great deal. So before we go any further, think about the person you know best in the entire world. The one who shares your home, your bed, your every single day. Now imagine you are thousands of miles from anyone else who knows you, and something goes wrong. Who tells your story? Who decides what version of the truth gets written down? Carly Aylesworth described the relationship between her mother and her stepfather, Brian Hooker, as, and these are her exact words, rocky at best. Brian's attorney pushed back on that characterization. He said Brian denies any wrongdoing, that he has been cooperative with authorities, and that the claims made by Lynette's daughter were unfair. Those two things can exist at the same time. A man who cooperates with investigators, and a marriage that had been quietly fracturing for some time. What we know is this: two people, one boat, thousands of miles from the life they used to know. Brian was 58, Lynette was 55. They had been living this nomadic sailing life together for years, moving through the Gulf of Mexico, down through the Caribbean, and eventually into the Bahamas. They documented the journey on YouTube and Instagram under the name The Sailing Hookers. On the surface, it looked like adventure, like freedom. But the pressure of that life is something most people don't account for. No escape from each other, no third room to walk into when things get tense. No friends nearby, no family down the street, just water and wind, and a marriage that, by at least one account, was already struggling. Relationships don't fall apart overnight. They unravel in slow threads, across months and years in the small spaces between two people who no longer quite trust each other the way they once did. And then comes the night of April 4, 2026, and everything changes. This is the account Brian Hooker gave to authorities, and it is important to walk through it exactly as he told it, because every single detail is going to matter. Brian says that on the night of April 4th, he and Lynette were riding in their small 8-foot hard-bottomed dinghy. They were heading from Hopetown toward the Soulmate, which was anchored in the waters near Elbow Cay. The conditions, he said, were difficult. Unpredictable seas, high winds, rough water. He says Lynette fell from the dinghy. She went into the water, and he says she had the boat keys with her when she fell, which caused the engine to shut off entirely, leaving him with no motor and no way to go after her. He says he threw a flotation cushion toward her immediately after she hit the water. He couldn't tell whether she grabbed it. The moon had not yet risen. He couldn't see her in the darkness. He yelled for about an hour, and then he says he made the decision to paddle. In his own words, "By the time I got the anchor set, I was probably a quarter to a half a mile away from her, and I decided that I had to go get help, but I could not get to the island, so I paddled, and it was a cascade of failures, and it's something I'm never going to forgive myself for. He arrived back at shore at around 4 in the morning. He did not report Lynette missing until the next day, April 5th. When Brian called Carly Aylesworth to tell her what had happened to her mother, his stepdaughter, on the other end of the phone, hearing for the first time that Lynette had gone into the ocean in the dark. Carly said his voice was monotone and relaxed. Monotone and relaxed. Sit with that for a moment. Not to convict anyone, not to reach a verdict before the evidence is in, but to feel what that must have been like on the other end of that phone call. Your mother, in the ocean, in the dark, and the man calling to tell you about it, calm. Here is where investigators began pulling at the thread. The distance from Aunt Pat's Bay, where the Soulmate had been anchored, to Marsh Harbor is not a short crossing. The Sea of Abaco at night, with no moon and high winds running across the water, is not a calm or forgiving stretch of ocean. And an 8-foot hard-bottom dinghy, without an engine, being paddled by one person against ocean current and wind in complete darkness, that presents a very specific set of physics. The timeline Brian described requires him to have paddled for approximately 9 hours. 9 hours, through open ocean, in the dark, alone, after watching his wife disappear into the water. This is not impossible, but it is the kind of claim that forensic experts and nautical investigators immediately begin stress testing, mapping against navigation charts, against current data, against tide tables, against the documented conditions on the Sea of Abaco that night. What pace would be required? What direction? What would 9 hours of paddling in those conditions do to a person's hands, their arms, their body? And what would it do to their mind? What does 9 hours in the dark on open water actually feel like? I want you to really think about that, not as a thought experiment, as a physical reality. Now add to it, somewhere behind you, the person you have spent 25 years with is in that same water, and you are paddling away. The Royal Bahamian Police Force arrested Brian on April 8th, 4 days after Lynette went missing. He was held for questioning and then released without charges. He maintained his innocence. His attorney issued a statement, and that, for a while, was where things sat. But investigators were not done, because what they found aboard the Soulmate was about to make the 9-hour paddle feel like the least troubling part of this entire story. There is a photograph. It was taken on the last day Lynette Hooker was seen alive. In it, she is wearing her Apple Watch. That watch ended up back on the Soulmate. Dry. Let that settle. If Lynette fell into the Sea of Abaco while wearing that watch, where did it go? Did the ocean return it to the boat? Did it swim back? Did it somehow find its way below deck on its own? Of course not. So the question becomes, how did that watch get back to the Soulmate? Either Lynette removed it before she entered the water, which raises its own deeply disturbing questions about what she may have known was about to happen to her, or someone else brought it back to that boat. And here is what makes this so significant. An Apple Watch is not a passive object. It is a forensic record. It contains GPS coordinates, heart rate data, a detailed log of movement, the precise time it last synced to a paired device, the last time its sensors detected a heartbeat. Investigators who seized that watch potentially have access to a minute-by-minute account of where Lynette Hooker's body was and exactly when it stopped moving. There are other digital questions aboard the Soulmate, too. Investigators have been probing potential footage from blink cameras installed on the vessel, Starlink connectivity logs, power usage records, engine data, dive weights, scuba tanks. The boat was not just a home. It was, if investigators are right, a crime scene. And it was filled with digital breadcrumbs that do not lie and do not forget. So here is the question I keep coming back to. If the Apple Watch data tells a story that matches what Brian told authorities, why has no one said so publicly? Cases where the evidence supports the suspect's account tend to produce statements. Exculpatory evidence gets released. People get cleared. The silence around that watch says something. I don't know exactly what, but it says something. Weeks after Lynette's disappearance, the Soulmate left Marsh Harbor. It was heading back toward the United States. The U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service, the criminal investigative arm of the Coast Guard, intercepted it approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast of Melbourne, Florida. They took the vessel into custody. It was towed to the Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce, where investigators treated it as a crime scene. They spent days aboard, removing items and bagging evidence, clothing, electronics, anything that could hold a story. The boat was later moved to Fort Lauderdale, where the examination continued. You do not intercept a boat at sea and treat it like a crime scene unless you believe a crime occurred aboard it. That is not routine procedure for a missing persons case. That is what a criminal investigation looks like. And then came the confirmation that changed the entire public conversation around this case. Sources confirmed that the Lynette Hooker investigation was now officially being treated as a suspected murder investigation. A U.S. official told CBS News it was being investigated as a, quote, possible foreign murder of a U.S. national, not an accident, not an unexplained disappearance, murder. That word changes everything, including how you watch this video. It changes how you hear the 9-hour paddle story. It changes what you think about the dry watch. It changes the weight of that monotone phone call. Murder is a word that requires two things, a victim and a perpetrator. And right now, one of those two people is missing, and the other one cannot be located. There is something the investigation has not resolved, and it may be the most important unanswered question in this entire case. On the night of April 4th, a sailboat, identified in reports as the Azora, was moored near the Soulmate in Aunt Pat's Bay. The Coast Guard Investigative Service has been actively searching for the owner of that vessel. They posted images of it publicly and urged anyone with information to come forward. Think about what that means. If someone was anchored next to the Soulmate that evening, close enough to share the same quiet bay, they may have heard things, seen things, noticed when the Soulmate's lights went on or off, noticed whether a dinghy left and when it came back, noticed whether there was one person moving around on deck, or two. The Azora is a potential witness that nobody has found, and in a case built almost entirely on the word of one man against the silence of the ocean. A human witness changes everything. A witness doesn't just add information. A witness either corroborates a story or it doesn't, and in a case like this one, that is the difference between an accident and a conviction. So I want to ask you directly, if you were anchored in those waters on the night of April 4th, and you saw or heard something, would you come forward? What would stop you? And what does it mean for justice if that person has already made the decision to sail away and pretend they were never there? On June 3rd, 2026, something shifted in this investigation, not in a press release, not in a statement from an attorney. On the ground, in the Bahamas, where the truth, if there is one to be found, is buried. The Broward County Sheriff's Office arrived at the Abaco Inn in Hopetown with a cadaver, dog named Maggie. The U.S. Coast Guard and the Bahamian Defense Force were also on the ground, walking the beach, wading through shallow water near the shore, scanning the mangroves at the edge of the island. This is the moment the investigation stopped looking at the horizon and started looking at the ground. When investigators moved from dragging the ocean to walking the shoreline with dogs trained to detect human decomposition through layers of sand and saltwater-soaked vegetation, they are communicating something without saying a word out loud. They are telling you they no longer believe Lynette's body is floating somewhere in the open water. They believe it is somewhere reachable, somewhere on land or just beneath the surface near the shore, in the mangroves, buried in the shallows. Cadaver dogs are not general-purpose animals. Maggie does not respond to living people. She responds to the specific chemical signature that human remains leave behind, a signature that persists, through soil, through sand, through water, through time. If Maggie stops and looks at her handler, it means something was there, or still is. The Abaco Inn has been mentioned in connection with troubling behavior in the final hours before Lynette was reported missing. The Coast Guard was also seen with cadaver dogs at the boatyard, where Brian Hooker was present the day he reported his wife's disappearance. Newly analyzed GPS and other electronic geographical data from Brian Hooker's devices have since shown investigators new areas to search. Areas in the Sea of Abaco that were never searched during the initial operation. And that data, according to officials, directly contradicts the account Brian gave to police about where they traveled, the night Lynette vanished. We are no longer looking at the horizon. We are looking at the ground beneath our feet. After being released from Bahamian custody, Brian Hooker traveled back to the United States, reportedly to visit his ailing mother. His current whereabouts are unknown. His U.S.-based attorney has declined to comment to media. A source claiming to be a close friend of Brian's suggested he may have left the country entirely, crossing the California-Mexico border by land or possibly by water. A former prosecutor following the case said federal investigators likely have Brian very much in their crosshairs. Carly Aylesworth has not stopped asking questions. She lost her mother, a woman who sold everything, who chose the water, who trusted the life she had built out there, and she refuses to let the silence win. Darlene Hamlet, Rachel Shaw, and others in Lynette's circle have been relentless, keeping her name in front of people who might otherwise move on to the next story. Lynette Hooker deserved to sail as far as she wanted. She deserved to wake up every morning with salt air in her lungs and the deck moving beneath her feet and know she was free. Wherever she is right now, she deserves to be found, and someone out there knows exactly where that is. There is one question this video cannot answer, and it may be the most important one of all. The Soulmates onboard cameras. If those cameras were running on the night of April 4th, that footage is sitting in an evidence room somewhere right now. It either shows exactly what Brian Hooker said happened, or it shows something else entirely. 3 possibilities. The cameras recorded, the footage was deleted, or they were never running at all. Each one of those answers is disturbing in its own way. Do you think those cameras captured something that night? And if they did, do you think we will ever be allowed to see it? Drop your theory in the comments below. And if you know anything at all, about the Azora or what happened in Aunt Pat's Bay on April 4th, the Coast Guard Investigative Service tip line is still open. Lynette Hooker, Michigan, the Bahamas, the Soulmate. Remember